Good morning. Welcome to the community practice on autism spectrum disorder and other developmental disabilities. My name is Tim Markle. I work for the Waisman Center, University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. Today, we are talking about autism, developmental disabilities, gut health, and sleep health. And we have a panel to talk a little bit more, go a little bit more in depth about gut health and how it's impacted them, and hopefully some of the solutions that they have found as well. And we hope to have time at the end so that other people can offer up their solutions as well. Remember, we realize that not everything is going to work for everyone, and so one size fits all doesn't exist in the human race. So thank you to our panelists. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. So let's go in the order that you're on our screen. Betsy, Sherry, James. In that order, introduce yourselves, and then I will start with the first question. My goal is that this becomes a discussion more than a question and answer session. So please feel free to respond back and forth and make this a conversation. I'll be watching the chat to see what may come in. Feel free to raise your hands and we will do questions as best we can. Thank you so much. So Betsy, followed by Sherry, by James, just some brief introductions. Thank you for being here.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name's Betsy Kimmel. Been a practicing dietitian for over 25 years now. I work at Friendship Circle of Wisconsin in Fox Point. If you're not familiar, we are a non-for-profit that trains and employs people with disabilities. So I work in the Employment Training Center, and I'm also the dietitian for Friendship Circle. So Tim asked me to talk about gut health and autism, and I was super excited because this is always on the forefront of what people are talking about. So what I put together, and again, if this isn't good, we can stop and talk about other stuff, but more so like just the understanding of the gut-brain axis and how that pertains to autism, and then some solutions, some dietary things. My personal connection to autism is working with students with autism. I do not have any family members, or I'm not personally affected outside of work, and so I'm sure it's easier for me to talk about things being not I don't want to say like you should be doing this, and I don't have the personal reflections toward it. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. So
Betsy, before you go on, I'm going to let everybody else just briefly introduce themselves.
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I didn't. I was not clear.
Okay.
Okay. So then we'll come back. Sherry.
Hi, I am Sherry Schultz. I am a nurse in the Waisman Center WIN program. So WIN stands for Wellness Inclusion Nursing. Our program is a community program where we support individuals from pediatrics. I mean, I think our youngest kiddo is about 3, all the way through end of life. Um, I think a lot of the individuals that we care for do have a diagnosis or are on the spectrum. And obviously there is a lot of GI issues that they experience. So my role through the Waisman Center is meeting with families, meeting with individuals and their support teams, and really kind of doing the detective work to figure out what is the problem, what's going on with their gut, but then more importantly, trying to come up with some practical approaches that will work for them to help manage the constipation or the GI issues that they're having. My experience, I have always worked at some shape or form with individuals with disabilities. In a camp setting, I did residential care through nursing school, independent nursing practice for some kiddos with extra health and medical needs. And then now this program through the Waisman Center. I also am now parenting a kiddo on the spectrum, which is a different experience that I think kind of that connection of what I've always recommended to people, I think is a different mindset when I realize how much harder it is to practice and keep that momentum going of the recommendations when we're not there in the home every day to, kind of be the support that sometimes it takes. So that is me.
Thanks, Sherry. Welcome. And Marcia is able to join us. Marcia, when you're comfortable, please turn your camera. We're just starting with some short introductions. So we haven't gotten into the meat of the panel yet. Marcia, we're good to go. James, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is James Williams, and I am an autistic self-advocate who has experienced a lot of gut issues and sleep issues growing up, including a chronic gut illness that almost ended my life when I was a preteen. And going through that experience forced me to accept the validity of sleep and gut issues in ways that not a lot of other people with autism I've seen necessarily do, in the sense that I've met autistic advocates disparage talking about gut and sleep issues because they associate any talk about that as, oh, curing autism. And I realize, no, you can talk about gut and sleep issues and still respect the individuality of a person's autism. And so going through issues that needed help while still wanting to respect my autistic identity shaped my self-advocacy and helped me realize that, contrary to what a lot of autistic people might believe, it is not mutually exclusive to want to improve your GI issues and your sleep, yet still want to be accepted as an autistic person and be proud of your autism.
Thank you, James. Marcia, would you care to introduce yourself?
Okay, hello. So my name is Marcia Dewey, and I kind of wear two hats here. One is, as a professional, I am an audiologist, and I work at Frederick Hospital, and I have been specializing in the area of tinnitus and sound sensitivities, which sounds like, why am I here? But with tinnitus in particular, sleep issues are one of the most common issues that come up for people. So I've, through the years, just by necessity, learned a lot about sleep and sleep strategies and sleep hygiene and things like this. And then my other hat is I'm a parent of a child who's 16, who's on the spectrum. And interestingly, my journey as a parent and in my professional career have really paralleled. Out of being a parent of someone on the spectrum, I really had to find our way and figure out what works best for him, how to kind of, James just said, how do you show up as an authentic person? How do you honor a person's authenticity rather than trying to say, oh, look more like this? But no, this is who they are, and how do you accept that? And so I've really pivoted a lot of my parenting to really look at a person, accept who they are, and honor their strengths and things like that. And I've carried that into my work as an audiologist with my patients as well, in that, lots of times, and I've kind of shifted to more of a mind-body approach, in that, when symptoms come to us, it's not always just physical. There's also some mental and emotional processes that involved. I think gut issues very clearly, many people know that when we're very nervous, our gut gets upset. So there are a lot of connections there, and I think sometimes there's disservice done to people when we ignore those parts of us, and they're ignored, and that can apply to sleep as well. So if we're stressed and our mind is racing and we're in fight or flight mode, we're not going to be able to sleep. So that's what brings me here today.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Betsy to let her continue what she had started off with, and kick us off on just, what sort of gut issues are you experiencing, and what sort of things have been some solutions that maybe other people can try and pick up on. So Betsy, if you want to go ahead and kick us off. And again, I'm hoping this will become a discussion. So I'm hoping to not say anything for the next half hour. That's my hope, gang. So hopefully you'll just go ahead and take this. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I've spent, a couple weeks doing a lot of research on this. And I'm just going to talk for a second about the gut-brain axis, just so that everybody understands what I'm referring to, that's the biodirectional communication between the gut and the brain. And it's a lot of complex interactions with the CNS, the enteric nervous system, and all of our gut microbiota. Um, everyone's talking about the second brain, the gut being the second brain, which is absolutely fascinating. So the second brain is kind of a complex network of neurons that are actually located inside of the GI walls. Um, and then so our gut is constantly producing different neurotransmitters, including serotonin, which is crucial for our mental health. I think it's like 80% of the serotonin is actually produced in our gut. So when we talk about autism, there's a lot of, they say microbial dysbiosis in autism and people on the spectrum. Um, so there has been research that has shown that there is actually different gut microbiotic the composition is completely different in neurotypical people and people with autism. Um, so this dysbiosis is what is contributing to all the GI symptoms of constipation, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and bloating. I saw a number that 70% of children with autism have some type of impaired GI function. And I see that actually every day in my class because we are constantly having, so I teach 2 classes a day. People are constantly leaving for the bathroom, having to go to the bathroom, stomachs upset, not able to participate in class. So of all the issues that I'm seeing, I'd say the gut issues on a 9 to 5 basis is what I'm actually seeing the most of. And then when I was asked to do this, I'm like, oh my gosh. So let me go back for a second. And if anyone wants to interrupt at or any time and bring anything in, that's awesome. So the microbial colonization actually starts in our prenatal development inside of the mother's womb, in the placenta and in the amniotic fluid. Um, so the colonization of some, not all, but of our bacteria actually is passed from the breast milk of lactating mothers. So then there's this whole thing about the research, which I know can get very complicated, having a vaginal birth versus a C-section and the type of the type of gut biome that you're receiving from your mom, whether you're born C-section or born vaginally. But the studies have shown that babies born through a vaginal delivery have more composition of a healthy bacteria in their gut. So another really big thing in addition to the gut health is talking about inflammation. And then I will bring in all the ideas for food and everything once I talk about inflammation. So that is inflammation refers to our body's immune system that is in response to harmful stimuli. And so when we talk about inflammation and gut health, the connection is that when we have our leaky gut and our gut is permeable, and the food particles go outside of our gut, then our bodies come and attack that, and then we have this inflammation within our body. And the chronic inflammation affects gut. Pretty much everything affects your gut, which is hard. So studies do show that individuals with autism do have a higher inflammation marker. Um, and it's believed
Before you
that
go on it, Betsy, it looks like
yeah.
Sherry
Oh,
has
I'm
something
sorry,
to
a
add.
question.
Oh, no problem. That's why I'm here to conduct.
Right. And I think I just wanted to add, like, I think all of the backs kind of information about it is really helpful. I think often our medical providers are not nearly kind of as aware of what the differences in autism can cause to the gut. And oftentimes they will, continue to recommend that, if you're doing all of the things we say you should do, you're pushing fiber, you're pushing fluids, we're pushing medications and they're not working. Like, what are you maybe not doing that you say you're doing? I think it's important to, like, push them in this direction. Like there are physically kind of cellular differences in you know, my child's gut that makes constipation more problematic. I think that's important. Like, I think knowing the information is good, but being able to use that information then to help the physician come up with the next steps versus maybe doubting that all of the steps are being followed that, you know, they start with for almost every other person that comes in or every other child that comes in with constipation. They may not be enough because fundamentally their guts are different.
Yes, I really appreciate you saying that so much because it is true. The cellular difference is really there, and research shows it, and it's so easy to say you're constipated, your stomach hurts, and to totally dismiss all of these things when there's real, true scientific proof. And the studies that are coming out are more. I mean, when I was looking this up, there are thousands of articles on this. Like I was completely blown away about this. I mean, it's something that I've known about, but I've never really dived this deep into it to the understanding of it. So it's been awesome for me. So then we kind of talked about that. So now let's talk about some interventions. Um, so the first thing is addressing food sensitivities. And that is complicated because everybody has different food sensitivities. So it first comes with identifying the food sensitivity, trying to see if you can stay away from it, and then possibly eliminating that food to see if that makes a difference in your GI system. Implementing a fiber-rich diet and limiting processed foods as much as possible. And the reason they say limiting processed foods because they tend to have more additives, MSG, things that are going to kind of aggravate your GI system a little bit more. And then that also causes, when you're bringing in processed foods, that's also going to increase the permeability of your gut, which then is going to lead to the inflammation. So it's kind of this trigger response. Common foods that are often eliminated that people first try are gluten, dairy, and artificial additives. But this is really interesting. This is one of the most interesting things, and I've known this as a dietitian, but it's come up so much that one of the most effective ways to improve your microbial diversity is to eat a wide variety of foods. And I know that's to this population, that's very challenging. And the reason that it is because if you eat the same food every day, you're going to encourage that bacterial growth. And what we really want is a bacterial diversity in the gut. So when you talk about eating different foods, it's like rotating your nuts, rotating your grains, rotating your proteins. And again, I know this is challenging in this population because exactly, the first person who spoke about her bologna sandwich. Oh, you have a question?
Yes, it's I've never had the conversation about gut issues, about medical issues come up, but when I do, I'm trying to figure out how to direct it towards more. I'm trying to figure out how to have a productive conversation about that. I know my question is really, really broad, but I guess that's it. Try to have a productive conversation.
Do you mean like in terms of potential interventions or just the understanding of it?
When I'm speaking in public, I'm often doing a soliloquy, whispering it aside to the audience. That's what everybody else is going to do after that. It's being that friendly plant in the audience. It's things like, yeah, we should eat a variety of foods so we'd have more helpful gut bacteria. And so that effect on the rest of the audience is going to be something like, oh, let's do that, and it leaves out James. I don't want to. I'm trying to figure out how to say this because I've engaged most of my life in the haha, they're crazy, they're doing medical stuff, but it's and it's really hard to try to kind of shift the rhetoric shift how I speak so that I don't throw them under the bus, but also make sure that we're doing other practical stuff too, because medical stuff in the larger world pretty much eclipses almost everything else. So I've always been trying to do both and never really quite sure how to not leave anyone behind. That's a big question, but there you go.
Well, I kind of understand what you're saying, but and it comes back to what Tim was saying in the beginning, is that it's such an individual approach. And especially even if you're working with a non-autistic person, when you bring in any dietary intervention modification, you really just kind of want to just start with one thing. So it can be overwhelming when you present all of these things at once, where it's like, do this, 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 and that. Where it's kind of like, what I really want to say is like, let's try this, but don't do it in a stressful way. Like, do it almost in a way that feels authentic and intuitive to you. Because then if we're doing things that we feel forced to do, we're gonna bring up a ton of anxiety, and that's gonna make everything worse. So we almost have to be in the right place to understand it and then to incorporate some of the foods.
Yeah.
Does that help at all?
It does.
Cool. Before we go further, I do want to allow James to come on in. And James, I didn't know, I couldn't tell if you wanted to share your story that you had mentioned earlier, or with your gut issues, or what you would. I thought I felt you might want to share that.
Well, actually, no. I really wanted Betsy and Sherry and Marcia to kind of, lead this presentation because they have the science behind the story I wanted to share. And my focus really wasn't necessarily about my story, but more about the social and societal impacts of living with those issues. And the fact that, you can study GI issues, sleep issues, study them all you want within the comfort of a lab or an office, but people with these issues have to live with them within the context of a society that's created parameters that sometimes interfere or harm with their ability to manage them. And I think about the fact that growing up, the biggest struggle I saw with so many issues, whether they were interoceptive issues, gut issues, was that sometimes the biggest challenges that autistic people like myself go through is that society bans us from talking about these challenges when they are visibly impacting us. And we can't tell people necessarily what's causing these visible impacts because of these social norms that we were born with. So for me, my interest is less about my story and more about the fact that just keep in mind, there are social rules and parameters impacting how people live with these issues. And researchers need to understand that those societal impacts are just as much an issue for these people as is what they're researching.
Thank you.
James, I think just to add on to that, I think that's part of, what we try to go in is to meet people and find out, what have you tried? What have you done? What has worked? What hasn't worked? And then, present ideas. There are hundreds of ideas to fix constipation out there. And it is not everyone is going to respond to the first. And I think also recognizing that not every intervention that we even mention is something that everyone is going to be able to do. I mean, for some people, just saying, increase your fiber, let's eat this for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they'll be able to do that. For other people, I've just asked you to move the mountain to try to fix your gut issue, and you're never going to be able to do it. So if it's not practical, it's not, getting your feedback, getting your buy-in, if it isn't something that you think is worth it, and worth it being the negative part that's going to come with every intervention, is worth trying it to see if it helps your gut. I think long-term, it's hard. Constipation, we can't come in and just fix constipation. It really, most people, it needs to be a lifelong kind of changes and interventions to help them. We're not going to change your gut biome. We're not going to change your abilities, your body's ability to feel necessarily you know, that it needs to go to the bathroom. What we can do is try to do interventions to help it improve. But, you know, I always say some things just aren't fixable, and that's where we come in to try to not fix them, but to make them a little bit better.
Absolutely. And I think of the fact that this weekend, although this is probably not necessarily going to impact a lot of us in this event, I want to make a shout out. This weekend is the beginning of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. And of course, Ramadan requires that people intentionally dysregulate themselves and not eat or drink during certain times. And I have friends who are Muslim and observe Ramadan who explain that this tradition began in their religion because their God Allah wanted them to remember and to be aware of what it's like when you don't have the privilege to take care of yourself, which a lot of people who are not Muslim do not understand. That's why that tradition is so important in their religion.
I think Betsy is sitting there wanting to talk, but I think she also wants to give space. Marcia, we haven't heard from you for a little bit. Would you like to chime in on anything? Or you don't have to. I'm not going to make anybody talk. No.
Well, I have more to talk about.
Okay, go ahead, Betsy, and then Marcia, as we work through your technology issues. Thank you.
Okay, so when and again, Sherry, I really appreciate everything that you're saying about, yes, you can't fix constipation, and all we're trying to do is offer ideas that might help it. And I from the medical side, and again, I'm not a parent, so I don't know what it's like to have a child and not force, but talk to them about, you know, bringing in probiotics and prebiotics and kimchi and things like that. But I do know from the medical side that when we do include some probiotic, prebiotic rich foods, the composition of our gut will change in our bodies. So that's really what I want to talk about, is that end, because that's my specialty. So, probiotics and prebiotics. So the consumption of any types of fermented foods, sauerkraut, pickles, you can pickle your own things. Again, that healthy bacteria is going to go into our gut and make a difference. There's also a new thing coming out called the fecal microbiotic transplantation. I don't know if anyone else can talk about that. So it's actually where you extract healthy microbiomes from a healthy individual, and you transplant it through fecal into a disrupted gut. So that to me is kind of crazy. Another thing that people are doing is called transcutaneous vagus nerve stimulation, and that's actually where you are trying to stimulate the parasympathetic nerve. And so that your body can kind of switch to that rest state versus the flight where all that stress comes in. And then, of course, we talked about, you know, outside of food, the idea of managing stress, meditation, yoga, things like that. Personally am a very big meditator because I have deal with a lot of anxiety myself. And it's been the only thing that I've learned for me to handle it. And I can feel my whole system come down. My whole nervous system just changes when I meditate. So not food related at all, but the importance of any type of thing where we can bring our nervous system down.
But it's that interconnectedness, Betsy, that our bodies don't, our gut really doesn't do anything apart from the rest of our bodies, and the rest of our body doesn't do anything apart from our gut. It's very interconnected. Marcia, it looks like you may have been able to unmute.
Yay, I unmuted. Sorry, I'm on my phone and I'm like, where's the mute? So I'm going to speak to two. Yes, the fecal transplant, I've heard of that. That's actually used often for people who get like, you know, resistant bacteria resistant type of, you know, infections, fecal transplants. That's been around for a while. So it's just what it sounds like. You get a healthy person's fecal matter, and then they put it in a blender, and then they insert it in the other person. So it's a way to transplant some of those good, healthy flora, that gut biome, and that and then 100% on the nervous system. So you're speaking my language right now. So what I've learned both as a parent as a provider is, we are whole people, like you just said, Tim, I always work with people as a whole. So that physical, mental, and emotional parts. And so, we can go into more of a fight or flight response, or we can go into more of a calm response, also known as rest, digest. And if we are more aroused and we're more activated in that sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, then our gut slows down or even shuts down. And if we can go to where we feel calm and safe, and that's part of that vagus nerve, like you mentioned, is then again called rest, digest. And so it's one or the other. So I think that's an important part. So definitely things that help regulate the vagus nerve. There's something called Safe and Sound Protocol, which is a listening protocol that is out there. But I think that I'm not on the spectrum, so I don't want to speak for people, but for my son especially, like it to be, neurodivergent in a world that isn't kind to that. You're more on edge, you're more hypervigilant. The world is scary, and there's sound sensitivities, which is what I work with as well. There are other light sensitivities, noise, and so the world can feel overwhelming, and we just expect people to just fit into that mold rather than adjusting for it. And so I think there's a lot of perpetual feeling that going to fight or flight, which is definitely going to affect that gut too. So that's what I had to say about that.
Thank you. Just want to take note of our time and say we got about 15 minutes left for the panel. We do have some people that are raising their hands. But I definitely wanted to get a little bit more into the reason why we invited this cross section here is other things that you have tried and found successful, or that you share with other self-advocates, or that you share with patients, or so just moving into that solutions type mode. I know that we've already started to talk a little bit about that, but I just want to give a few more minutes for that, and then we'll go and we'll open up the discussion to others as well.
Well, one thing I just want to say, when I was battling a GI disruption that almost resulted in me starving to death as a preteen, my mother and I consulted any doctor we could find that was doing whatever research they could. And one of the things that my mother and I realized is we didn't care if the doctor had some belief that we didn't agree with. If the doctor could save my life, that's all that mattered. And as it turns out, the doctor that saved my life has a lot of beliefs that people thought were controversial, but you know what? He saved my life. And he saved my life by helping me understand two things that I follow to this day. First, that some autistic people, their guts don't have the ability to digest certain nutrients and foods, even if those nutrients are essential. And we have to stop assuming that a function that's occurring naturally in a typical gut is happening in an autistic gut. Second, even if we don't want to argue any disproven theories about autism or its cause, we have to keep an open mind about something that can be beneficial or even save the life of a typical person might be harmful to a person that is already autistic through those bodily differences. And that in many times, the missing link in autism research is when we attribute something to the cause of autism, when in reality, we are seeing an adverse reaction to something with someone who's already autistic.
I'll kind of piggyback right on to James about that. I think, the physical differences that can happen. I think there's also so many just individual differences. Nothing in constipation will fix everything. It's really trying to figure out what is the thing that might improve it. I always say, you know, I'm a nurse. I don't fix anything, unfortunately, but I can try to improve. And hopefully small incremental improvements can get at really the heart of the problem. Um, I think one piece of advice that I try to give families when I'm meeting with them and we're talking about constipation, and really oftentimes by the time they're meeting with me, it's really impacting their child's life and comfort and ability to do the things that they want to do. One thing I really focus on is, you know, let's try to maximize the effects that we can do with small lifestyle changes, you know, drinking fluids, eating fiber, getting some kind of probiotics, if that's a supplement, if that's, you know, adding yogurt every single meal that they will eat it, is trying to maximize that. And then bringing in the healthcare team. You know, I'm not all about constipation. Again, it's a long-term thing. It isn't always about the medications, but sometimes you need medications along with those lifestyle choices or changes to be able to manage it and be comfortable. So I think, you know, I think we spend a lot of time talking about on the changes that we do, but sometimes medications really are, along with those changes, what's going to make the difference.
Okay, so we have a, we go ahead if that's okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Marcia, did you have something you wanted to add? Oh, okay. Nancy, do you want to go ahead and unmute, and ask your question to the panel? And then if y'all can look into the chat, if you're able to do that, there's some questions in the chat on prebiotics, probiotics that are totally out of my range to answer. So I'll leave that to y'all. But Nancy, go ahead.
Thanks, Tim. I have some questions about things that I don't think hardly anybody talks about with this. And it's not that it's controversial, but I was very surprised to find out when our family went through this genetic analysis of 23andMe. And I have, you know, the very similar Western European, you know, English, German stuff. And I was discovered that I have a double dose of genes that will digest milk. So some of the people that have issues with milk, I never have had them. I could guzzle milk from here to eternity and it wouldn't hurt me. And I know other people are sensitive to that. Has anybody thought about or done research about what your genetic makeup does, you know, aside from the autism, that might affect what you should or shouldn't eat and might give you a heads up about that? Has that ever been talked about?
So I think it's
Absolutely.
pretty traditional, sorry, that people who are not white, Caucasians are more, they've had longer periods of time of ingesting milk, and so they've built up some of those ability to digest milk, where people of color usually they're much more likely to be lactose intolerant. So I know that as far as dairy. Mhm.
I actually wanted to say yes. My family underwent some genetic testing too, because growing up, I had a large gluten intolerance, but never a dairy intolerance. And that was actually discovered by a similar thing, Nancy. I have very strong dairy tolerance DNA from the fact that my mother is fully Armenian, and Armenians have been consuming dairy longer than other cultures. In fact, Armenians even have traditional mythology where they credit themselves as the first inventors of yogurt. There's a whole part of their culture where they consider themselves, they were the first to invent yogurt when they carried milk using containers of animals they slaughtered. So it turns out that dairy DNA in my case canceled out any casein intolerance I might have because
Thanks, James. Any response to the questions that are coming up in the chat? I would love to get some takes on prebiotics, probiotics. So, well, just if you could take a look at those, that'd be great.
I think so. Definitely my specialty is not like which probiotic, prebiotic to do. Generally, trying to get a probiotic that has as many different species of the bacteria in it as you can are good. Probiotics are quite expensive, and they're another thing that are not insurance covered. So like when I'm talking with families, I'll ask them, go to the pharmacist and talk about what they have available and kind of what is at that price point that you will be able to consistently continue on, because it isn't we can buy a bottle of it and you can take that bottle and you're going to see this huge difference. It can take a long period of time on it until you're kind of that bacterial levels are really high enough to matter. Yeah, that's my take on it. I think it's an interesting field that I think we're going to learn more about, because more and more information is coming out about the gut biome.
In terms of strength in terms of if you are looking for a strength on the probiotic, I normally recommend to do like 50 billion. That's a good one to start with. And then just to go at it slowly. So you can do like every 3 days, every 4 days, always start a probiotic slowly. But of course, what Sherry was saying is that if we can find it in our food first through yogurt, and then even when I've actually interestingly been finding different products with probiotics put into it. So I think a lot of different brands are trying to do that. There's now prebiotic sodas. I mean, it's kind of the new trend in food. But again, we can always go back to the basics of like yogurt. Sometimes there's even a probiotic powder that you can find, and that's a really great way to make it last a lot longer, because you can, put 1/4 of a teaspoon. You can gradually work your way up to putting it into foods, and you could hide it that way too in a yogurt or, I'm sorry, not yogurt, like a pudding, something sweeter if you wanted to put it in. And then a couple people, of course, are talking about the cost of probiotics, and yes, they are ridiculously expensive, and they really shouldn't be. So I wish I had more to say on that, but I don't. So thanks.
All right, just some time for some final thoughts from each of you before we move on to allowing our sites to have time to discuss locally about what their experiences are. So Sherry, final thoughts?
I think, when I think of constipation, I think really it's the little changes that are sustainable for you. It's not a problem that's going to be fixed easily and quickly. So trying to find something that will work long term, and kind of that intermixing, trying the interventions that we can try at home and calling into the medical world as we need to, if someone is constipated and having pain and it's affecting all aspects of their life, they might not have the, weeks and weeks that it can take to try to manage it. So.
Thank you. Marcia? I lied. James?
There you go. Sorry, I got
Oh,
it.
no, there
Okay.
you go. Yay, Marcia.
I noticed if I just start talking, it gives me the unmute button. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of piggyback on a couple of things that other people said. So one of the things that you said, James, was finding a physician who, that saved your life. And I love that. And I also think it's important to sometimes we have an inner physician and listening to our own intuition. So when you're going to a provider that sort of dismisses you, and Sherry, you made some points as well as, you have to do this thing and you're not getting better. So you must not be really doing the thing that I told you to do because I'm right. And if it's not working, it's you. And so I think sometimes we need to follow our intuition and that inner physician for ourselves of, does this make sense? Is it realistic? Can I do it? And on that, with my own experience with my son, there was a point where all of a sudden he just wouldn't eat his lunch that I packed because he just decided that it went bad. It went bad between 8 a.m. and 11:30. And that was it. And there was nothing it's an apple. It doesn't go bad. It sits on the counter at home. It doesn't matter. So you get a lot of, I think, judgment or recommendations of like, eventually they'll eat. they'll eat what you make. And, no, they won't. They will starve to death, And so we get a lot of this, like you said, this kind of typical message of what works for kids. And it just, as a parent. And so I think just that was one thing I wanted to kind of just, again, piggyback on what some other people said. And just that if you get a provider who's dismissing you like that, we actually ended up hooking up with someone that was like in the UK, and getting testings here and sending it to her there. And so sometimes you have to really go far for that. The sad thing is many people don't have those kinds of resources, is what's been said here too. And someone made a comment about living in a food desert. And so sometimes these solutions are not always accessible to everybody. And I just wanted to say that. And then from a mind body perspective, again, how do our emotions play into that? And how do we help people bring in a sense of safety? And James, you used that word interoception, which is like feeling inside of our body. And not only do even those of us not on the spectrum in our society and our culture and the world just really don't teach us those skills of how do you look inside? How do you make connections with your emotions and your body and what you feel in your gut and what you feel in your chest? And we have these sayings like it's a gut feeling and my gut is telling me, this connection between the brain and the gut is very strong. And so how do we help people feel safe? And then it seems that more people on the spectrum tend to have more difficulty with interoception, on top of the fact that our culture doesn't honor it or teach it. So it is a skill set. So listening to our body, turning inwards towards our body, following where does our emotion show up in our body. So that's some of that mind body aspects, as well as, again, bringing in safety. So if I've been at school all day and trying to keep it together or work or whatever that is, or just getting to the bus stop and all these things have assaulted me, it's going to get my system more activated and my gut's going to shut down because I'm going more towards fight flight. So what are things that we can do to support self-care and feeling safe and things like that? And obviously there's not a lot of time to get into all of that, but I think those are important pieces as well. And that's it.
And I just want to say thank you for acknowledging that. And I think one thing that has to be reminded is, as much as we aspire to optimal health for everyone, when a person's willing to endanger a more essential need instead of change, then you have to override what you're doing. I myself went through a phase of risking life-threatening starvation as a child instead of eating the few things I would eat. And I think about the fact that my younger sister was not autistic, but she was a late toilet trainer. And there was a time when she pretended to be toilet trained when she was actually holding in everything for over a week. And when you got a child that's going to endanger their life, suddenly you have to override what you're doing, because that's more important, even if you dislike what's going on. And I think one other thing too is that we have to stop shaming autistic people for their health issues. I go every year to an all disability conference in Florida where I meet people with conditions where there's no solution to some of their health issues. Some conditions result in an early death, and it doesn't matter how hard the person wants to avoid it, they're going to die young. And in those disability cultures, you learn to accept your early death, your health issues, and the parents learn not to shame these people. And there's some lessons we can learn from those disability cultures.
And Betsy.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone's point. This has been so interesting. I think just an individual approach is so important to consider for everyone. There's not going to be one size fits all. I love, Marcia, how you brought up the mind-body connection, and that we look so much for the outside, and often we have everything we need inside. We just kind of need to slow it down. And when it comes to food, which is fascinating, is that, everyone's like food, 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 but yet if we're in a stressed environment and we're eating that food, it could be as healthy as it could possibly be, and it's not doing anything good for us. So that is often like one of the most overlooked things that I see is that when we're eating, right, to be in a calm environment, to enjoy the food that we're eating, because if we're eating something that someone's telling us to eat, we're actually not going to digest it because we're going to be angry about eating it. So it's so important to like enjoy what you are eating it in a calm, environment. That makes as much as a difference as eating a probiotic, in my opinion. So,
Thank you so much. And thank you all the panelists. This has been one of the more interesting discussions that I think we've ever had at a community practice. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. So we're going to give some time to go ahead, and sites, feel free to discuss among yourselves unless you already have been, which is fine. For those of you who want to, we can hang on and have a continued discussion for about 5 more minutes as a large group. So if you're hanging with us, please feel free to raise your hand, put something in the chat. The panelists that can hang out for 5 more minutes would be great, and then we'll take a really short break before our next panelist. So thank you. I'm going to end the recording now.